Honestly, sometimes I wonder if he belongs in this room.
I assure you, I'm exactly where I need to be.
I used to think confidence had to be loud. I believed power came from who spoke the most, who commanded attention, who walked into a room like they owned it. My boss was that person, and for a long time I admired him for it. My husband, on the other hand, was quiet, observant, grounded, and back then I mistook his calm for weakness. The night everything changed was supposed to be a celebration, a corporate dinner to honor a successful quarter. I insisted my husband come along. He hesitated, knowing how my workplace functioned, but he eventually agreed, smiling that way he always did when he chose peace over pride. The moment we arrived, my boss took over. He was charismatic, surrounded by laughter, soaking up admiration. When he noticed my husband, his eyes lingered just long enough to size him up. The handshake was firm but dismissive, his smile sharp, not warm. At first, the comments were subtle. Jokes disguised as compliments. Questions that sounded polite but were designed to belittle. He asked about my husband's job with a tone suggesting it couldn't he possibly be impressive. When my husband answered calmly, my boss just chuckled and turned away, as if the response wasn't even worth hearing. And I laughed along. That's the part that still makes my stomach twist. Each laugh was a small betrayal. Each smile was an invitation for things to go further. My boss grew bolder, openly comparing himself to my husband, framing it as humor. He talked about ambition, dominance, and success, all while glancing at my husband, asking the room to judge the difference between them. My husband remained silent. He just sipped his drink, listened, and watched. And the more composed he stayed, the more my boss pushed. At one point, he made a joke that crossed a line. He suggested that I must be the real achiever in our marriage, implying my husband was just lucky to be tolerated. The table erupted in awkward laughter. I froze. I didn't know whether to defend the man I loved or maintain the fragile social balance I was clinging to all night. Before I could say a word, my husband finally spoke. His voice wasn't raised. It wasn't aggressive. It was calm, steady, and impossibly clear. He thanked my boss for the entertainment, and then he corrected a few assumptions about his work, his values, and his life. He spoke with a quiet confidence, not bragging, not attacking, simply stating facts. He didn't need to prove himself. He just told the truth. The room went silent. For the first time all night, my boss looked uncomfortable. He tried to laugh it off, but my husband didn't stop. He addressed the mockery directly, explaining that respect isn't earned by humiliating others and that real strength doesn't need an audience. There was no insult in his words, but they landed harder than any insult could have. People started nodding. Someone changed the subject. The entire energy of the room shifted. And just like that, my boss wasn't the center of attention anymore. On the drive home, I expected my husband to be angry, to lecture me, to demand an apology. Instead, he was quiet, not cold, just distant. That silence hurt more than shouting ever could. When we got home, he finally spoke. He told me he didn't mind being underestimated. What hurt was realizing I had joined in, that I'd chosen approval over partnership, that I'd watched someone disrespect him and smiled right through it. I tried to explain myself, stumbling over excuses that sounded hollow even to my own ears. He listened, nodded, and told me he needed time. Not to punish me, but to decide what kind of respect he was willing to accept in his life. That night, I didn't sleep. Over the next few weeks, I noticed how differently people treated my husband after that dinner. Some approached him with a newfound respect. Others avoided him completely. My boss stopped making jokes, stopped posturing. He had been exposed not as powerful, but as insecure. But the reflection I couldn't escape was my own. I realized how close I had come to losing something so solid for something so superficial. My husband had never needed to dominate a room to be strong. He had simply waited for the moment when dignity would speak louder than ego. I apologized not just once but many times. Not with dramatic gestures, but with changed behavior. I started defending him openly. I set boundaries at work. I stopped seeking validation from people who thrived on diminishing others. Our marriage didn't transform overnight. Trust takes time to repair, but something fundamental shifted. I learned that true strength isn't about intimidation. It's about restraint. It's about knowing who you are so deeply that mockery can't even shake you. A few months later, my boss left the company. No announcement, no farewell party, just gone. The workplace felt lighter without him. One evening, sitting beside my husband in quiet comfort, I realized something profound. The most powerful person in the room isn't the loudest or the most feared. It's the one who doesn't need to prove anything at all. I once laughed at the wrong man. I'll never make that mistake again. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more.